He knows nothing.
This has to close tomorrow.
He still suspects nothing.
They are using your name.
To steal my money?
No. To leave you with everything.
Louis Flores was 42, a senior building inspector for the city of Indianapolis. To everyone who knew him, he was an ordinary man with an ordinary paycheck and an ordinary life. His neighbors believed Louis lacked ambition. His co-workers assumed he would retire in the same modest office where he had worked for nearly 12 years. Every weekday, he drove the same 12-year-old Ford Explorer, carried lunch in a faded blue cooler, and spent weekends repairing things around the house instead of paying someone else to do it. What they didn't know was that Louis had spent years learning one lesson: the quietest man in the room usually noticed everything. At 12:17 a.m., he woke to the sound of Clara whispering downstairs. Hidden by the darkness, he heard 4 words that made his heartbeat slow instead of race. He knows nothing. Louis closed his eyes, stayed perfectly still, and listened to every word. Before we continue, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Leave a comment with your country and your local time. I always enjoy seeing how far these stories travel around the world. And if you enjoy slow-burning mysteries where patience beats panic and truth always catches up, consider subscribing. Tomorrow's story might remind you why the smallest detail is sometimes the one that changes everything. The following afternoon arrived with the same quiet routine that had fooled almost everyone who knew Louis Flores for years. At 6:15 a.m., he backed his aging Ford Explorer out of the driveway on North Meridian Street, stopped at the same Speedway gas station for black coffee, and drove toward the Department of Business and Neighborhood Services in downtown Indianapolis. Nothing about his movements suggested that he had slept barely 4 hours. He inspected 2 commercial renovation sites before noon. One was an aging brick warehouse near Southeast Street. The other was a dental office expansion on West Washington Street. Contractors greeted him with familiar smiles. Louis checked electrical permits, measured emergency exits, documented fire code violations, and signed inspection reports with the same calm precision he displayed every working day. No one noticed that his eyes lingered a second longer than usual. No one noticed he checked his watch every 15 minutes. At exactly 1:42 p.m., his phone vibrated. A text from Clara appeared. Running to Carmel. New client consultation, probably home around 6. Louis read the message once. He never replied immediately. Instead, he opened Google Maps, looked at the estimated driving route from their home to Carmel, and quietly memorized the travel time. Then he slipped the phone back into his pocket and finished speaking with a construction supervisor about sprinkler clearance requirements. Nothing in his voice changed. By 2:10 p.m., he clocked out early using accumulated vacation hours. He had requested those hours 3 weeks earlier for an entirely different reason. Today, they became useful for something else. Louis drove north before turning east, deliberately avoiding the route Clara expected him to take. He knew one simple rule from years spent analyzing human behavior during military intelligence assignments: never begin surveillance from the target's last known location. He parked across from a coffee shop near Keystone Avenue, where Clara's silver Lexus usually passed on its way toward the northern suburbs. At 2:47 p.m., the Lexus appeared. She was alone. She wore a cream-colored blazer that Louis had never seen before. According to her message, she was heading toward Carmel. Instead, she drove south. Louis waited nearly 30 seconds before pulling into traffic. He kept 6 to 8 vehicles between them. Every stoplight became an opportunity to disappear inside ordinary traffic. He never stared directly at her vehicle. He watched reflections in storefront windows instead. The Lexus exited Interstate 65 and continued toward an older industrial district west of downtown Indianapolis. The neighborhood had changed little in decades. Weathered brick factories, closed machine shops, faded loading docks, empty parking lots surrounded by chain-link fencing. This was not where interior designers met wealthy homeowners. Clara slowed beside a converted warehouse on West Morris Street. The original manufacturing building had been renovated into executive office suites several years earlier. New glass doors stood beneath restored steel beams, while expensive SUVs filled the private parking lot behind the building. She parked. She checked her phone. Then she waited. Louis drove another block before parking beside a delivery truck belonging to an HVAC contractor. From there, he had a clear view through binoculars small enough to fit inside his glove compartment. 7 minutes passed. A black BMW X5 entered the lot. The driver stepped out. Tall, athletic build, dark gray tailored suit, confident posture. Louis had seen him once before at a charity fundraiser nearly 8 months earlier. Ethan Brooks, commercial real estate developer, 41 years old, president of Brooks Urban Development. Ethan looked around casually before walking toward Clara. There was no embrace, no kiss, no obvious display of affection. Instead, Ethan handed her a thick manila envelope. Clara immediately opened it. She removed several documents. The two stood shoulder to shoulder studying the pages. Louis lifted his camera. Click, click, click. Every photograph automatically recorded GPS coordinates and timestamps. Neither Ethan nor Clara noticed. They entered the building together. Louis remained where he was. Following people into enclosed spaces created unnecessary risk. Observation mattered more than curiosity. He started writing. 2:58 p.m. Silver Lexus arrived. 3:05 p.m. BMW arrived. Envelope exchanged, entered Building 3. No physical intimacy observed. 28 years earlier, one of Louis' instructors had repeated a sentence that never left him. Facts first, interpretations later. He still lived by that rule. At 4:18 p.m., Ethan exited alone. He carried nothing. He spoke briefly on his phone while walking toward his vehicle. Louis photographed the BMW license plate. Indiana registration, clean image. The developer drove away heading east. Clara remained inside. Another 19 minutes passed. When she finally emerged, the envelope was gone. Instead, she carried a slim leather portfolio. She smiled as she typed something into her phone. Seconds later, Louis' own phone vibrated. Another message. Meeting went great. Client loved the concepts. Stopping by Target before heading home. Louis stared at the words. He looked across the parking lot. There was no Target within several miles. He placed the phone face down, not because the lie hurt, because it confirmed something important. People willing to invent unnecessary lies often believed the listener would never verify them. Louis waited until Clara disappeared from view before leaving his position. He did not drive home. Instead, he slowly circled the office complex. The directory beside the entrance listed 12 businesses: architectural firm, engineering consultants, property management company, insurance agency, commercial law office, accounting services. Then one name caught his attention. Midwest Capital Advisory Group, financial consulting. Louis looked at the building once more. This had never been about decorating living rooms. He parked across the street again and watched employees leave during the next hour. At 5:31 p.m., a maintenance worker wheeled a trash container toward the alley. A loose document slipped from the overflowing bin and landed on the pavement. The wind carried it several feet before stopping beneath a parked pickup truck. After the maintenance worker disappeared inside, Louis walked calmly across the street. He picked up the page. Most of the document had been soaked by coffee. Nearly everything was unreadable. Almost everything. In the upper right corner remained part of a blue corporate logo. Only 3 words survived. Indiana Community Bank. Louis folded the paper carefully. Not because it proved anything, because evidence often arrived in fragments long before the full picture appeared. He returned to his Explorer and drove home. Clara arrived 23 minutes later carrying 2 shopping bags. One came from Target. She laughed while describing an imaginary client who could not decide between 2 shades of paint. Louis listened. He nodded at the appropriate moments. He grilled chicken on the back patio. They ate dinner together while neighborhood children rode bicycles past the house. The evening looked perfectly normal. Clara asked about work. Louis mentioned a broken fire alarm system at an apartment complex. Nothing more. She poured another glass of iced tea. He noticed her phone light up twice. Each time she turned the screen away before reading the message. Small movement, natural, almost invisible. He filed it away beside every other detail. At 9:46 p.m., Clara kissed him goodnight and walked upstairs. Louis stayed in the kitchen. He spread today's photographs across the dining table. He enlarged one image on his laptop. The manila envelope Ethan had handed Clara was partially open. Only a narrow strip of its contents could be seen. Most people would have ignored it. Louis zoomed in, pixel by pixel. The image became grainy. Then one detail sharpened just enough to read. Printed across the top edge of a document inside the envelope was the unmistakable blue emblem of First Indiana Community Bank. Louis leaned back in his chair. This was no longer beginning to resemble a secret affair. It looked like the opening move of something far more expensive. Louis Flores had never believed that truth revealed itself in dramatic moments. It emerged in patterns, tiny ones. The kind most people dismissed because each detail seemed harmless on its own. The morning after discovering the First Indiana Community Bank logo, Louis left for work at precisely 6:32 a.m. He completed 2 inspections before lunch, answered emails, and signed permit approvals with the same careful handwriting his supervisors had praised for years. Nothing about his routine changed. Only his evenings did. At 7:40 p.m., after Clara went upstairs to shower, Louis carried a cardboard archive box from the garage into his small home office. Every financial statement from the past 5 years had been organized by month inside labeled folders. It was an old habit inherited from his grandfather, who believed paperwork solved arguments better than memories ever could. Louis spread 6 months of bank statements across the desk. Checking account, joint savings, utility payments, mortgage records, credit card bills. Nothing immediately appeared unusual. That was exactly what concerned him. Professional fraud rarely looked dramatic. It blended into ordinary life. He opened a spreadsheet and began entering dates, restaurant purchases, gasoline, parking garages, hotel charges, online subscriptions. Every transaction received its own row. Then he opened Clara's shared digital calendar. Most appointments matched legitimate client meetings. Some did not. On February 14th, Clara had written, "Kitchen consultation North Carmel." Louis checked the credit card used that afternoon. No lunch, no coffee, no design supply purchase. Instead, there was a $24 parking fee charged downtown near West Morris Street, the same industrial district where she had met Ethan Brooks. He highlighted the row. Yellow. 3 weeks later, another client meeting supposedly took place in Fishers. The GPS history from Clara's vehicle told a different story. Their insurance company offered a voluntary driving app that reduced premiums by recording mileage. Louis had almost forgotten it existed until he logged into their account. The Lexus had never reached Fishers. It spent 2 hours parked less than half a mile from Midwest Capital Advisory Group. Another yellow highlight. He kept going. March, April, May, June. By midnight, the spreadsheet displayed 8 separate dates, 8 different explanations, 8 identical destinations. Louis leaned back in his chair. 1 meeting could be coincidence. 8 became a routine. His eyes drifted toward the family room. Clara laughed softly while watching a television series upstairs. She sounded relaxed, comfortable, certain. Louis felt no satisfaction from finding inconsistencies, only disappointment. He closed the laptop and sat silently for several minutes. His marriage deserved certainty before accusation, nothing less. The next afternoon, during his lunch break, Louis visited the city's public records office. Commercial property records were public information. Within 20 minutes, he learned Ethan Brooks had recently purchased 4 aging warehouses through different limited liability companies. Each company had a different name, different mailing address, different registered agent, yet all had been organized within 9 months. That timing overlapped almost perfectly with Clara's repeated visits. Interesting. Still not enough. Louis copied the public filings and returned to work. 3 days later, he contacted someone he trusted. Noah Bennett answered on the second ring. "Louis, haven't heard from you in years." Noah had served with Louis in military intelligence before building a respected digital forensics consulting business in Indianapolis. Unlike television hackers, Noah preferred warrants, consent forms, and legally preserved evidence. "I need your professional opinion," Louis said. "Personal or legal?" "Both." They agreed to meet Saturday morning at a quiet cafe near Monument Circle. Noah arrived carrying only a laptop and a legal pad. After listening without interruption, he asked one question. "Do you have authorized access to the devices you want examined?" Louis nodded. "The desktop computer belongs to both of us. Our family cloud account is shared. I'm not asking you to break into anything." "Good." Noah closed the notebook. "Then we'll stay entirely inside the law." Louis appreciated that answer. Anything obtained illegally could destroy the truth instead of protecting it. That afternoon, Noah began reviewing the shared cloud storage using credentials Louis already possessed. Thousands of ordinary files appeared: vacation photographs, insurance documents, home renovation receipts, holiday videos, nothing suspicious. Until Noah checked the synchronization history. He frowned. "What?" "Someone deleted an archive 6 months ago." "Can it be recovered?" "Maybe." Deleted cloud files often left metadata behind even after the contents disappeared. Several hours later, Noah successfully restored fragments from an older backup maintained automatically by the service provider. Not photographs, not emails, PDF files. Most refused to open because they had been damaged during deletion. One survived. It contained a property feasibility report prepared for Brooks Urban Development. Louis stared at Ethan's company logo. What would Clara be doing with this? Noah kept searching. Another recovered folder appeared. Its title read simply, Personal. Inside were scanned documents, wire confirmations, draft contracts, meeting agendas. Most looked incomplete. Yet every file connected Ethan's development company with Midwest Capital Advisory Group. No interior design plans appeared anywhere. "This isn't proof of a crime," Noah cautioned. "No," Louis agreed, "but it's proof she wasn't decorating houses." Noah nodded. "Exactly." Late that evening, another recovered spreadsheet opened successfully. Columns of numbers filled the screen. Company names, transfer dates, reference numbers, payment amounts. Many exceeded $50,000. One transaction immediately caught Louis's attention, authorized by Louis Flores. He looked again, then a third time. The authorization line displayed his full legal name beneath what appeared to be an electronic signature. His stomach tightened. "I never signed this." Noah enlarged the document. The signature image was inserted digitally. "You can tell." "Look here." He pointed toward the timestamp. "The document claims it was executed at 11:43 p.m. Louis remembered that night perfectly. He had been conducting emergency inspections after severe tornado damage on Indianapolis's southeast side. His city-issued GPS logs could verify his location. He had never even opened a computer. Another document surfaced. Again, Louis appeared as the approving party. Another electronic signature. Another impossible timestamp. Each authorization involved a different company connected to Ethan Brooks. Noah stopped typing. "I think someone copied your digital signature." Louis remained silent. Identity theft was serious. Corporate fraud involving forged authorization was worse. He suddenly understood why Clara had whispered those 4 words. He knows nothing. Someone believed ignorance would protect their plan. Instead, it had given Louis time. Time to observe, time to document, time to stay calm. Noah printed every recovered file, generated forensic hash values, and copied the originals onto a write-protected evidence drive. "From this point forward," he said, sealing the drive inside an evidence envelope, "don't alter anything. Don't confront anyone. Don't even let them suspect you've seen these." Louis accepted the envelope carefully. Outside the cafe, the afternoon sky had turned gray. Rain began falling across downtown Indianapolis. Traffic slowed beneath glowing streetlights. Louis sat inside his Explorer for several minutes before starting the engine. The evidence on the passenger seat felt heavier than paper, because it wasn't simply exposing deception. It suggested someone had already begun using his identity to move money he had never authorized. And if forged signatures already existed, there was only one question that mattered now. How much had been taken before he ever heard Clara whisper that he knew nothing? Louis Flores did not call the police. Not yet. By Monday morning, the evidence drive Noah Bennett had prepared rested inside a locked, fireproof safe in Louis's home office. Another encrypted copy remained in Noah's possession under a documented chain of custody. Louis wanted every step recorded long before anyone questioned how the evidence had been obtained. At 8:15 a.m., while contractors argued over steel framing at a renovation site on East Market Street, Louis made a phone call during his lunch break. "Margaret Holloway speaking. My name is Louis Flores. Noah Bennett suggested I call you." There was a brief pause. "If Noah recommended you, I'll assume this isn't a routine divorce consultation." "It isn't? Can you meet this afternoon?" "I can." Margaret's office overlooked Monument Circle from the 9th floor of a restored limestone building. Unlike the polished corporate firms nearby, her reception area was simple. Dark wood shelves lined one wall. Every framed certificate reflected decades spent handling financial fraud and trust litigation. She greeted Louis with a firm handshake. "Noah told me only one thing," she said as they entered her office. "He said you understand the value of evidence." Louis placed the evidence envelope on her desk. "I'd rather understand what I'm looking at." For nearly 2 hours, Margaret reviewed every document without interruption. She never rushed. Every page received a numbered sticky note. Every questionable signature was compared against authentic records Louis had brought from city employment files. Finally, she folded her glasses and leaned back. "You've done something most clients fail to do." Louis waited. "You haven't confronted anyone?" "I didn't think it would help." "It almost never does." She opened one folder again. "People imagine the biggest mistake in fraud cases is stealing money." She tapped the forged authorization. "It isn't. The biggest mistake is believing they have unlimited time before someone starts asking questions." Louis remained silent. Margaret continued reading. "The signatures are convincing enough to fool someone processing paperwork quickly, but they won't survive forensic examination." She turned another page. "The electronic timestamps also raise questions. How? They don't match the metadata Noah recovered." Louis frowned. "I don't follow. The visible timestamp says this document was executed at 11:43 p.m. The embedded metadata says portions of it were edited the following afternoon." She slid the paper across the desk. "Documents usually tell the truth, even when people don't." That sentence stayed with Louis. Margaret requested additional information. Joint tax returns, insurance records, property deeds, retirement accounts, corporate registrations. Louis answered every question carefully. When she finished organizing the files, she drew a simple diagram on a yellow legal pad. In the center, she wrote Louis's name. To one side, she wrote Clara. Opposite her, she wrote Ethan Brooks. Then she added several LLC names recovered from the cloud backups. Arrows connected each entity. Money flowed one direction, liability flowed another. Margaret circled the second path. "This concerns me more than the transfers." "You think they're stealing from me?" She looked directly at him. I think someone is building a structure designed to collapse. Louis studied the diagram. I'm still missing something. Exactly. She stood and walked toward the office window overlooking downtown Indianapolis. If I wanted to steal $1 million from someone intelligent, I wouldn't simply transfer the money. She turned back toward him. I'd arrange things so that when regulators arrived, every signature pointed back to the victim. The room became very quiet. Louis looked again at the forged authorizations. Everyone carried his name, his digital signature, his approval. Margaret spoke softly. Someone isn't just stealing from you. She paused. They're preparing to leave you with the liability. The words settled heavily. For the first time since hearing Clara whisper downstairs, Louis felt genuine anger rising. Not because of the money, because someone intended to destroy his reputation. His career depended upon public trust. Building inspectors approved millions of dollars in commercial projects every year. Any allegation involving financial fraud could end his employment long before a courtroom reached a verdict. Margaret seemed to recognize the thought crossing his mind. You cannot afford one emotional mistake. I know. No phone calls. He nodded. No accusations. Again, he nodded. And absolutely no letting Clara know you've discovered any of this. Louis understood. If the conspiracy continued naturally, people involved would continue making decisions. Every decision created more evidence. Every conversation increased the chance of mistakes. Margaret gathered the documents into separate folders. I'll begin verifying every company registration connected to Ethan Brooks. What should I do? Continue living exactly as you have. That evening, Louis followed her advice. He returned home carrying groceries. Clara greeted him with an easy smile. You remembered the coffee beans? You were almost out. She kissed his cheek before returning to the kitchen. Nothing in her expression suggested concern. She prepared pasta while discussing a future vacation she hoped they could take in early autumn. Louis listened carefully. He noticed another small inconsistency. Clara mentioned she would be unavailable Thursday afternoon because of a design presentation. Louis remembered Thursday immediately. According to one recovered calendar file, Ethan Brooks had scheduled a meeting that same afternoon with executives from Midwest Capital Advisory Group. Another overlap. Another quiet note added to the growing pattern. After dinner, Clara settled onto the sofa with her laptop. Louis sat nearby reading a building code revision manual. Occasionally, she glanced toward him. Each time he appeared absorbed in municipal regulations. Years earlier, military instructors had taught him that the best disguise was consistency. People rarely questioned behavior they expected. At 9:18 p.m., Clara's phone vibrated. She looked at the screen. I need to answer a client. She stepped onto the back patio. Louis did not follow. Instead, he quietly opened the home security application connected to the cameras surrounding the property. The rear camera had no audio, only video. Clara paced slowly across the deck while speaking into her phone. Several times she laughed. Then she stopped walking and turned her back toward the house. Her shoulders became tense. The conversation lasted almost 11 minutes. When she returned inside, she smiled naturally. Everything okay? Louis asked. Just a client changing furniture deliveries. He nodded once. No argument, no suspicion, only calm acceptance. Later that night, after Clara fell asleep, Louis reviewed the outdoor camera footage frame by frame. No sound, just movements. At one point, Clara removed a folded document from her jacket pocket and held it toward the porch light before placing it back again. A habit, checking paperwork while talking. He captured a still image, not because the paper could be read, because the action itself might later establish a timeline. The next morning brought another surprise. Margaret called before 8. I found something. What is it? Ethan Brooks registered a new limited liability company 6 weeks ago. Is that unusual? No. What is unusual is the registered business address. Louis waited. It's your home. He stared through the windshield of his parked Explorer. Our home. Yes. I never authorized that. I know. Margaret's voice remained steady. The filing lists your residential address as the principal place of business. Louis closed his eyes briefly. Someone had begun anchoring corporate records to his property. Without his knowledge, without his consent, exactly as Margaret had warned. The structure was growing, layer by layer, paper by paper, quietly, methodically. And somewhere inside that growing web, Clara continued believing Louis Flores knew nothing at all. Margaret Holloway insisted that Louis make no major decisions for 48 hours. Every instinct you have is telling you to get ahead of them, she said over the phone. Ignore that instinct. If they're confident, they'll expose themselves faster than you ever could. Louis agreed. Patience had carried him through military intelligence work years earlier. It had also made him an unusually effective building inspector. Contractors often mistook silence for uncertainty. They filled that silence by talking too much. People under pressure behaved the same way. Wednesday morning began with rain sweeping across Indianapolis. Louis completed an inspection at a mixed-use development near Mass Avenue before driving toward First Indiana Community Bank. He had no appointment with anyone inside the building. Instead, he sat in a coffee shop across the street, watching customers enter and leave. He wasn't watching the bank. He was watching the parking lot. At 10:13 a.m., Ethan Brooks arrived in the same black BMW Louis had photographed days earlier. He entered through the executive entrance. 38 minutes later, he walked out carrying a slim leather portfolio. No one accompanied him. Louis photographed the time. Nothing more. Back at City Hall, his phone buzzed. Margaret. I've confirmed something important. I'm listening. Your grandfather's trust. Louis straightened in his chair. Very few people even knew it existed. After the death of his grandfather, Miguel Flores, nearly 8 years earlier, Louis had inherited substantial assets, not directly, but through a professionally managed, irrevocable trust established decades before. Miguel Flores had grown a regional construction supply company into one of Indiana's largest privately owned distributors before selling it shortly before retirement. Instead of handing cash to his grandson, he created legal protections. The trust owned the investments. Independent trustees managed them. Louis received scheduled distributions. He could never simply empty the accounts. At the time, Louis had thought the arrangement overly cautious. Now it seemed almost prophetic. Margaret continued. I contacted the trustee this morning. What did they say? They've received 3 separate inquiries over the last 2 months requesting information about your trust. Louis frowned. I never contacted them. I know. Who did? They couldn't disclose the names over the phone. Louis remained silent. But they confirmed every request was denied. Why? Because none of the callers could answer the security verification questions. Louis looked out at his office window. Someone had been trying to learn about assets they couldn't reach. Margaret's voice sharpened. Louis, I think Clara and Ethan believe you personally control the trust. But I don't. Exactly. The realization changed everything. Until now, Louis had assumed money was the primary objective. Now he understood something different. Someone was searching for a door that didn't exist. That afternoon, he drove to visit his mother. Olivia Flores still lived in the modest ranch house where Louis had grown up on the south side of Indianapolis. She greeted him with a warm hug before pouring coffee into 2 chipped ceramic mugs that had survived decades. You look tired, she said. Busy week? She studied him quietly. Unlike most people, Olivia never accepted easy answers from her son. You came here because something's wrong. Louis nodded. He trusted his mother enough to tell her almost everything, leaving out only details that Margaret had asked him to keep confidential. Olivia listened without interrupting. When he finished, she walked to an old cedar cabinet in the living room. From the bottom drawer, she removed a sealed envelope. "I wondered when you'd need this." Louis recognized his grandfather's handwriting immediately. His own name appeared across the front. "I've never seen this." "You weren't supposed to." Olivia handed it to him. "Your grandfather told me to give it to you only if someone ever became interested in your inheritance instead of your character." Louis carefully unfolded the letter. The paper had yellowed with age. The handwriting remained steady. "If you're reading this, someone has probably mistaken wealth for ownership. Remember this: money can be stolen, property can be forged, signatures can be copied. Character cannot. The trust was never designed to make you rich. It was designed to keep impatient people away from what they did not earn." Louis lowered the page slowly. His grandfather had anticipated something remarkably similar decades earlier. Olivia smiled faintly. "He trusted lawyers more than luck." "So did I." "No," she corrected gently. "You trusted people." There was no accusation in her voice, only observation. On the drive home, Louis called Margaret. "I want every trustee informed." "They already are." "I also want alerts placed on every trust-related account." "I anticipated that." "You move quickly." "I've learned that organized criminals work on schedules." Margaret paused. "And I don't intend to let them keep theirs." The following morning brought confirmation that their precautions had been worthwhile. At 9:27 a.m., the trustee's chief compliance officer called Margaret. An unidentified individual had attempted to submit updated contact information connected to Louis's trust. The request appeared legitimate. Correct legal name, correct date of birth, correct mailing address. One problem remained. The request originated from an IP address in downtown Indianapolis rather than from Louis himself. It had been rejected automatically. Within minutes, the compliance department had frozen all non-essential administrative changes pending direct verification. Margaret called Louis immediately. "They're getting desperate." "So they tried again?" "Yes." "And now we know something else." "What?" "They're moving faster." That afternoon, Louis received another text from Clara. "Running late. Ethan invited several designers to tour one of his redevelopment projects. Great networking opportunity." It was the first time Clara had voluntarily mentioned Ethan's name. Louis read the message twice. Interesting. Only a week earlier, she had referred vaguely to clients. Now she was becoming less careful. Confidence often produced carelessness. He simply replied, "Sounds good. Drive safely." No questions, no suspicion. At 6:18 p.m., Clara returned home carrying brochures featuring luxury loft apartments scheduled for construction the following year. She placed them casually on the kitchen island. "You should see this project," she said. "It's going to transform the entire neighborhood." Louis flipped through the glossy pages. One rendering showed a renovated warehouse. Another displayed rooftop gardens. Everything looked expensive, professional, legitimate, until he reached the final page. Printed near the bottom was the project developer's legal entity, Morris River Redevelopment, LLC. Louis recognized the name immediately. Margaret had mentioned it that morning. It was one of the newly registered companies connected to Ethan Brooks, and according to public records, its principal business address was Louis and Clara's own home. He closed the brochure without changing his expression. "You like it?" Clara asked. "It's ambitious." She smiled. "I thought you'd say that." Later that evening, after Clara fell asleep, Louis photographed every page of the brochure before returning it exactly where she had left it. He emailed the images to Margaret using encrypted transfer software Noah had recommended. 5 minutes later, Margaret replied with only one sentence. Excellent. Now we know which company they'll use next. Louis locked his phone and looked toward the dark hallway. For the first time since this nightmare had begun, he no longer felt as though he were chasing clues. The clues were beginning to come to him. And somewhere beyond those glossy brochures and forged signatures, someone still believed Louis Flores was nothing more than a quiet city inspector driving an old Ford Explorer. They had no idea the strongest protection around his family's fortune had never been the trust itself. It had been the patient man they assumed would never look closely enough to uncover the truth. Louis Flores had spent enough years studying people to recognize one dangerous pattern. Once someone believed they were winning, they stopped protecting themselves. That realization became the foundation of Margaret Holloway's strategy. "We're not going to chase them," she said during a meeting in her office the following Monday morning. "We're going to let them reveal everyone involved." Around the conference table sat only 4 people: Louis, Margaret, Noah Bennett, Detective Daniel Mercer from the Indianapolis Metropolitan Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit. Mercer had been brought in only after Margaret confirmed that multiple forged authorizations, fraudulent business registrations, and attempted access to the Flores family trust could constitute several state and federal offenses. The detective studied every document without speaking. Finally, he looked at Louis. "You've handled this better than most victims." "I wasn't trying to build a criminal case." "No," Mercer replied. "But that's exactly what you've done." He opened a notebook. "From this point forward, assume every communication matters." Margaret nodded. "No unnecessary confrontations." Mercer added another rule. "No secret recordings that violate Indiana law." Louis appreciated the reminder. He wanted justice, not shortcuts. Noah connected his laptop to a large monitor. "I've mapped the timeline." A digital chart filled the screen. Blue dots represented legitimate events. Red dots represented suspicious ones. Every meeting between Clara and Ethan, every forged authorization, every attempted trust inquiry, every newly registered LLC, viewed together, the pattern was unmistakable. "The intervals are shrinking," Noah said. "They started meeting every 3 weeks. Now they're meeting every 4 or 5 days." Mercer folded his arms. "Which usually means the operation is approaching a deadline." Margaret looked toward Louis. "So now we test them." Louis raised an eyebrow. "How?" Margaret smiled faintly. "Controlled information." She explained the idea carefully. People leaking confidential information rarely realized they were doing it. Give different versions of the same fact to different individuals. Watch which version reappears elsewhere. The source identifies itself. Simple, legal, effective. Louis listened quietly. "What information?" Margaret slid a folder across the table. "A fake investment opportunity." Inside was a professionally prepared memorandum describing an entirely fictional plan. According to the document, Louis intended to liquidate several municipal bonds held outside his family trust and deposit approximately $2.4 million into a new private investment account within 30 days. Every page looked authentic. Every figure appeared reasonable. Every legal citation checked out. Only one problem existed. None of it was true. "The account doesn't exist," Margaret said. "The investments don't exist. The money doesn't exist." Mercer smiled. "But if someone acts on this information, we know exactly where it came from." Louis finished. The detective nodded. "Precisely." Later that afternoon, Louis returned home, carrying the folder inside an ordinary leather briefcase. He deliberately left it on the dining room table instead of locking it inside his office safe. Nothing about the placement appeared intentional. It looked careless, exactly as planned. During dinner, Clara mentioned another design consultation scheduled for Wednesday. Louis nodded while serving roasted vegetables. "I'll probably meet with my attorney Wednesday morning." That sentence had also been planned. Clara looked up briefly. Oh, just updating some financial paperwork after Mom found a few old investment records. What kind of investments? Louis shrugged casually. My grandfather owned municipal bonds for years. He took another bite of chicken. I may consolidate a few accounts. He changed the subject before Clara could ask another question. The conversation drifted toward neighborhood news, a new grocery store, road construction, weather forecasts. Nothing unusual. After dinner, Louis carried the briefcase into the living room. He removed only one document before excusing himself to shower. The remaining papers stayed inside, visible, accessible. He never checked whether Clara looked inside. He didn't need to. The next morning, he quietly examined the position of several pages. The corners no longer aligned exactly as he had left them. Someone had opened the folder. He smiled to himself. The trap had already begun working. Wednesday arrived. Louis attended a genuine meeting with Margaret at 10 o'clock. Nothing discussed involved investments. Instead, they reviewed evidence preservation procedures and additional public records. At 11:46 a.m., Noah called. They took the bait. What happened? The fake investment account. Louis stopped walking. What about it? Someone attempted to verify it. Already. Less than 18 hours after you mentioned it. Noah sounded almost impressed. The inquiry originated from a computer network registered to Midwest Capital Advisory Group. Louis remained silent. Margaret looked across her desk. That was fast. Noah continued. They searched for the account number listed in the memorandum. The fictional one. Exactly. Mercer, who had been listening through speakerphone, wrote several notes. Excellent. Louis frowned. It feels strange calling attempted fraud excellent. Mercer looked up. Evidence is excellent. He closed the notebook. People reveal themselves when they think they're acting privately. That afternoon, Clara returned home unusually cheerful. Ethan thinks business is about to explode. Louis looked up from trimming hedges in the backyard. That's good. They're expanding. I'm happy for him. Again, he offered nothing more. Silence invited conversation. Clara filled it naturally. They're looking at several $1 million in financing. Louis wiped dirt from his gloves. Sounds ambitious. She laughed. It is. He noticed she seemed energized, confident, completely unaware that every new statement now fit inside an expanding timeline investigators had already begun constructing. The following morning, another unexpected development occurred. Sarah Whitmore. The name appeared in an email forwarded by Margaret. Senior Vice President, First Indiana Community Bank. Louis recognized the title immediately. Margaret had spent 2 days reviewing publicly available banking disclosures and networking records. Sarah appeared repeatedly alongside Ethan Brooks at commercial real estate conferences, photographs, panel discussions, charity galas, ribbon-cutting ceremonies. Nothing illegal, nothing suspicious. Until Noah overlaid those public appearances with dates from Clara's meetings. Several matched almost perfectly. Mercer studied the chart carefully. I don't like coincidences. Neither do I, Margaret replied. No conclusions yet, Louis said quietly. Mercer smiled. That's why I enjoy working with you. Most victims wanted arrests after suspicion. Louis wanted proof before accusation. The detective tapped Sarah Whitmore's name. If confidential banking information moved outside the bank, someone inside had access, Margaret finished. Louis looked again at the timeline. Ethan, Clara, Midwest Capital Advisory Group, First Indiana Community Bank, forged authorizations, trust inquiries, now a senior banking executive appearing again and again at the edge of the same circle. The picture remained incomplete, but another piece had found its place. Friday evening brought one final confirmation. Louis arrived home shortly after 6. Clara was upstairs. Her phone rested charging on the kitchen counter. It vibrated once. The screen lit briefly before locking again. Louis never touched it. He simply read what appeared in the notification preview. Meeting confirmed. Monday. Same conference room. Bring revised account documents. EB. The message disappeared seconds later. Louis walked away as though he had seen nothing. Because seeing was enough, touching the phone would have crossed a line. Observation remained legal. Interference did not. Later that night, Louis sat alone on the back patio. The neighborhood had grown quiet. Sprinklers hissed across freshly cut lawns. A freight train echoed somewhere beyond downtown Indianapolis. He thought about the whisper that had started everything. He knows nothing. He almost laughed. Not because the situation amused him, because the sentence had become dangerously inaccurate. Now Louis knew about Ethan. He knew about the shell companies. He knew about the forged signatures. He knew someone had searched for his trust. He knew confidential information leaked almost immediately after reaching Clara. And now, for the first time, investigators had a credible reason to look closely at someone inside First Indiana Community Bank. The conspiracy was no longer hiding in the shadows. It was beginning to outline itself, one careful piece at a time. Monday morning began with a sky the color of brushed steel. Louis Flores arrived at City Hall before 7, finished reviewing permit applications, and signed 3 inspection reports before most of his co-workers had finished their first cup of coffee. Routine had become his greatest disguise. The more ordinary he appeared, the less likely anyone would imagine he was helping assemble a criminal investigation. At 8:42 a.m., Detective Daniel Mercer called. "We have enough to start requesting financial records." "Will the bank cooperate?" "They'll cooperate if the paperwork is correct." Mercer never sounded hurried. His calm reminded Louis of experienced investigators who understood that successful financial cases depended less on dramatic arrests than on immaculate documentation. 2 hours later, Louis met Margaret Holloway and Noah Bennett in a private conference room. Stacks of folders covered the table. Margaret pointed toward one marked First Indiana Community Bank. "We've verified Sarah Whitmore's role." Louis listened carefully. "She oversees commercial lending and corporate relationship management." "Does that give her access to client information?" "It gives her access to far more information than an ordinary branch employee." Noah opened another folder. "I also reviewed publicly available corporate filings." He rotated his laptop. Sarah Whitmore's name never appeared on Ethan Brooks's companies. That was expected. Professional conspirators rarely placed their own names on questionable paperwork. Instead, Noah highlighted something else. The registered agents. Every shell company used a different registered agent, different mailing address, different legal representative, different filing dates. At first glance, they looked unrelated, until Noah overlaid another layer of information. Each company had financed projects through the same commercial banking division, the same division supervised by Sarah Whitmore. Louis studied the chart. "So every road eventually leads back to one office." "Exactly." Mercer folded his arms. "Still not proof." "No," Margaret agreed. "But it's becoming a very interesting coincidence." That afternoon, subpoenas were quietly served. No patrol cars, no public announcements, no dramatic confrontations. Only legal documents requesting specific records connected to Ethan Brooks's commercial entities. Financial fraud often collapsed under paperwork long before suspects realized investigators had begun looking. 3 days later, the first responses arrived. Mercer spread the documents across the conference table. "Let's start simple. Wire transfers, loan applications, corporate resolutions, account opening forms. Most appeared legitimate, until Noah noticed something unusual. Look at the authorization sequence." Louis leaned closer. Every commercial transaction required multiple approvals: internal review, compliance verification, executive authorization. Yet several multi-million-dollar loans had moved through the system significantly faster than normal. Some received final approval within a single business day. Mercer frowned. That's unusually quick. Margaret nodded. Especially for newly formed LLCs with limited operating history. Noah highlighted another column. Same approving executive. Sarah Whitmore, again. No one in the room spoke for several seconds. Louis understood why. Patterns mattered. One unusual approval could be explained. 7 nearly identical approvals demanded explanation. Mercer wrote another note. I'm requesting the complete underwriting files. Margaret smiled slightly. I thought you might. Later that evening, Louis drove home through light traffic on Interstate 65. Clara was preparing dinner when he walked inside. You look exhausted, she said. Busy inspections? She handed him a glass of iced tea. I'll be working late tomorrow. Another client? Ethan has investors visiting from Chicago. Louis nodded while setting his lunch cooler on the kitchen counter. Hope it goes well. She smiled. I think this project could change everything. Louis noticed the wording. Not his project. This project. A subtle difference. People often revealed emotional investment through language long before they realized they were doing it. Dinner passed peacefully. They discussed neighborhood landscaping, a broken sprinkler, his mother's upcoming birthday. Nothing connected to business, nothing connected to Ethan, nothing connected to money. Exactly as Louis intended. The following afternoon, Mercer called again. We found something. Louis closed his office door. What is it? One loan package includes your name. My name as a financial reference. Louis's expression hardened. I've never authorized that. We know. Mercer emailed the scanned page. Louis opened it immediately. His name appeared in a supporting financial summary. Occupation, address, estimated assets. Everything looked accurate. Except for one sentence. Personal guarantor available upon request. Louis stared at the screen. I never agreed to guarantee anything. You didn't. Mercer spoke carefully. But someone wanted the bank to believe you might. Margaret joined the conference call moments later. That's not the dangerous part. What is the dangerous part is psychological. Louis waited. Ethan wasn't merely trying to access your money. Margaret paused. He wanted the bank to believe you stood behind him. The realization settled slowly. A respected city employee. Stable employment. Family trust. Clean financial history. Louis' identity carried credibility. Someone had quietly been borrowing that credibility. Not openly, not directly. Just enough to make risky transactions appear safer. Noah spoke next. I finished analyzing the cloud backups. Anything useful? I recovered deleted email headers. Can you read the messages? No. The content is gone. But the metadata survived. He displayed another timeline. Several deleted emails had traveled between Clara and Ethan immediately before major loan approvals. One recipient appeared repeatedly. S. Whitmore. The remainder of the address had been partially corrupted. Mercer looked satisfied. I think we finally know who we're looking at. Louis remained cautious. Or we know someone communicated with that address. Mercer smiled. Fair correction. Friday morning brought another breakthrough. A compliance manager from First Indiana Community Bank contacted investigators voluntarily after learning subpoenas had been issued. She requested confidentiality. During a recorded interview, she explained that Sarah Whitmore occasionally bypassed ordinary review procedures by labeling certain commercial clients as expedited relationship accounts. The designation itself was legitimate. Its frequency was not. According to internal policy, expedited processing required documented justification. Several Ethan Brooks entities contained almost none. Mercer thanked the manager. After the interview ended, he looked toward Margaret. "Now we have internal concerns." Margaret closed her notebook. "And internal witnesses." That evening, Louis sat alone inside his Explorer, outside a neighborhood grocery store, while Clara shopped. Rain tapped softly against the windshield. His phone vibrated. A secure message from Noah. "Recovered attachment available." Louis opened the file. It contained a scanned meeting agenda from 6 months earlier. Present Ethan Brooks, Clara Flores, Sarah Whitmore. 2 additional names Louis didn't recognize. Discussion topic Phase 2, Capital Strategy. No criminal language, no explicit fraud. Only one sentence caught Louis's attention. Coordinate supporting financial profile before final submission. He read it again. Supporting financial profile. His financial profile, his reputation, his identity. Piece by piece, the purpose of the forged signatures became clearer. Someone hadn't simply wanted access to money. They wanted Louis himself to become the respectable face standing quietly behind transactions he had never approved. The phone rang again. It was Detective Mercer. "I've got good news." "What happened?" "The final subpoena responses should arrive early next week. And if they match everything else?" Mercer's voice remained calm. "Then this stops being suspicion." Louis looked through the rain-covered windshield toward the grocery store entrance. Clara emerged carrying 2 shopping bags. She smiled when she spotted his Explorer. She waved exactly as she always had. To everyone watching, they looked like an ordinary married couple finishing another ordinary Friday. Only 4 people in Indianapolis knew that a growing mountain of documents was preparing to tell a completely different story. And somewhere inside First Indiana Community Bank, someone still believed Louis Flores had never started asking questions. 48 hours. That was the window Detective Daniel Mercer circled in red at the top of the investigation timeline. "Based on everything we've collected," he said during the Monday morning briefing, "if Ethan Brooks intends to close these transactions before anyone notices the irregularities, he'll have to move within the next 2 days." Louis sat quietly at the conference table. Margaret Holloway had arranged the meeting in a secure conference room inside her firm's office. Noah Bennett projected the latest timeline onto a large monitor while Mercer reviewed the sequence of events. Every forged signature, every shell company, every suspicious loan, every attempted inquiry into Louis's family trust. The pattern was no longer theoretical. It had become predictable. "They're accelerating," Noah said. He highlighted a series of dates. The first questionable transaction happened almost 6 months ago. Another click. The second came 3 weeks later. Another. Then every 2 weeks. One final click. Now they're making significant moves every 3 or 4 days. Mercer nodded. "That usually happens when people think they're approaching the finish line." Margaret looked towards Louis. "Which means we let them believe they're still ahead." Louis understood. Nothing about his daily routine could change. No sudden vacation, no unusual banking activity, no confrontation with Clara, no emotional reaction. If anyone involved sensed the investigation, months of careful work could disappear overnight. That afternoon, Louis inspected a shopping center renovation on the west side of Indianapolis. Contractors complained about delivery delays. Electricians debated wiring diagrams. The property manager apologized for incomplete paperwork. Louis handled every conversation exactly as he always had. His clipboard remained steady. His voice remained calm. His phone vibrated twice during the inspection. Both messages came from Clara. The first asked whether he wanted chicken or salmon for dinner. The second mentioned she would be meeting Ethan and several investors to review architectural renderings. Louis replied only once. "Chicken sounds good. See you tonight." Nothing more. That simplicity was intentional. Back at the office, Noah called. The compliance team confirmed another inquiry. The trust? No. The fictional investment account. Louis stopped writing. Again? This time someone searched for routing instructions. The fake account doesn't even exist. I know. They're trying to prepare a transfer before the account is supposedly opened. Louis leaned back slowly. They're moving faster than we expected. So are we? Noah replied. That evening, Clara arrived home just after 6. She appeared unusually energetic. The investors loved the presentation, she said while placing groceries on the kitchen counter. I'm glad. Ethan thinks funding could be finalized this week. Louis opened a kitchen cabinet. Congratulations. She laughed. You always sound so calm. He smiled slightly. I've never seen panic improve a situation. For a brief moment, Clara simply watched him improve a situation. Then she returned to unpacking groceries. Louis noticed something different. Her confidence had become visible. She no longer chose every word carefully. She assumed the difficult part was over. After dinner, Clara excused herself to answer another business call on the back patio. Louis remained inside, reading a building inspection report. He never approached the window. He never tried to hear the conversation. Instead, he quietly noted the start time, 8:14 p.m. The call ended at 8:27, 13 minutes, another entry on the timeline. Tuesday morning began with unexpected news. Mercer called before Louis reached his first inspection. We've identified another company. Louis pulled into an empty parking lot. What kind of company? A title agency. Mercer emailed several documents. Heartland Property Closing Services. The agency had processed nearly every commercial real estate transaction involving Ethan Brooks during the previous year. Margaret joined the conference call. The closing scheduled for tomorrow involves one of Ethan's largest redevelopment projects. The warehouse conversion. Yes. Louis immediately remembered the glossy brochure Clara had brought home. Morris River Redevelopment, LLC. The same company using his residential address. Mercer continued. If the transaction closes, several $1 million in financing will move between accounts. And afterward, it becomes much harder to unwind. Louis understood. Money could often be recovered. Paper trails could often be reconstructed. But once large commercial developments advanced through multiple transactions, untangling responsibility became significantly more complicated. We'll be ready, Mercer said. That afternoon, Louis visited his mother after work. Olivia poured coffee without asking questions. She had learned long ago that her son spoke only after organizing his thoughts. Finally, Louis summarized the latest developments. She listened quietly. When he finished, she smiled gently. Do you remember what your grandfather used to say before fishing trips? Louis thought for a moment. Don't scare the water. She nodded. If you stomp around the shoreline, every fish disappears before you ever cast a line. Louis smiled for the first time in days. Margaret would like him. I think they would have argued. Probably. But they'd have respected each other. The conversation stayed with Louis during the drive home. Don't scare the water. It perfectly described the investigation. Late that evening, another development arrived. A secure email from Noah. Recovered calendar invitation. Louis opened the attachment. Wednesday, 9:30 a.m., Conference Room B. Attendees Ethan Brooks, Sarah Whitmore, Clara Flores. Subject final document review. No location appeared. Only the meeting title. Mercer received the same file within minutes. His response came almost immediately. They're preparing for closing. Wednesday morning unfolded with remarkable normality. Louis reported to work. Clara left the house carrying a leather portfolio. She kissed him goodbye. Wish me luck. Good luck. She drove away smiling. Louis waited exactly five minutes before leaving. Not to follow her. That phase of the investigation had already served its purpose. Instead, he drove directly to Margaret's office. Mercer was already there. Several federal investigators had joined the meeting quietly because portions of the financial activity now appeared to involve interstate wire transfers. No arrests had been authorized. Not yet. Everyone understood the importance of timing. At 9:18 a.m., Noah's phone rang. He answered immediately. His expression changed. "They've entered the conference room." Mercer looked up. "Source?" "The cooperating compliance manager." She was inside First Indiana Community Bank, legally, voluntarily. Providing updates investigators were entitled to receive through ongoing cooperation. No recording devices, no secret surveillance. Only observations permitted under internal policy. They've started reviewing closing documents. The room became silent. Minutes passed. No one spoke. Every investigator watched the clock. At 10:07, another message arrived. Additional paperwork requested. At 10:19. Revised signature pages printed. At 10:31. Meeting temporarily paused. Mercer frowned. "Something changed." "What?" "We don't know yet." 10 more minutes crawled by. Finally, Noah's phone vibrated again. His eyes narrowed as he read. "They're asking about the investment account." Louis exchanged a glance with Margaret. The fictional account, the bait. "They're verifying where future distributions should be sent," Noah continued. Margaret leaned forward. "They've completely accepted the story." Mercer closed his notebook slowly. "They're not just planning fraud anymore. They're acting on it." At exactly 11:02 a.m., Louis's own phone vibrated. The number was blocked. He answered without speaking. A distorted voice came through the speaker. "You should stop asking questions." The line went silent for 2 seconds. Then the caller spoke again. "Walk away before tomorrow." The connection ended. Louis stared at the screen. No anger, no fear. Only another fact. Another timestamp. Another piece of evidence. He calmly handed the phone to Detective Mercer. "I think this belongs in your report." Mercer looked at the call log and nodded. "It certainly does." Outside the conference room window, downtown Indianapolis continued as though nothing unusual was happening. Traffic moved through intersections. Construction cranes swung slowly across the skyline. People hurried toward lunch meetings without realizing that somewhere inside the city a carefully constructed financial conspiracy had just taken another dangerous step. And for the first time since hearing Clara whisper in the middle of the night, Louis knew someone on the other side had finally realized there was a problem. They just didn't know how much he already knew. The anonymous phone call lasted 11 seconds. Detective Daniel Mercer listened to the recording extracted from Louis's carrier minutes later. The voice had been electronically distorted. No names, no direct threats of violence. Just one sentence. "Walk away before tomorrow." Mercer replayed it twice before setting his phone on the conference table. "People usually make calls like this for one of two reasons." Louis waited. "They're either trying to scare someone," he paused, "or they're scared themselves." Margaret Holloway closed the case file in front of her. "I prefer the second explanation." Noah Bennett nodded in agreement. "The timing isn't random." He projected the investigation timeline onto the conference room screen once again. The anonymous call had arrived only 31 minutes after the meeting inside First Indiana Community Bank began discussing the fictional investment account. "They reacted," Noah said, "to information that never existed." Louis studied the screen. "They're rushing." "They're making mistakes," Mercer corrected. "And mistakes are evidence." But by early afternoon, investigators confirmed the meeting at the bank had ended without the commercial closing taking place. Something had delayed the transaction, no one yet knew what. Mercer instructed everyone to remain patient. If they're trying to repair paperwork, they'll schedule another meeting. And if they don't, Louis asked. They've already shown us they won't abandon several $1 million. Margaret leaned forward. People willing to forge signatures rarely walk away voluntarily. Louis left the office shortly after 2. Instead of returning home, he drove to Eagle Creek Park on the northwest side of Indianapolis. The meeting location had not been his idea. It had been Ethan Brooks's. At 12:48 p.m., Clara had sent Louis a text message. Ethan wants to apologize for misunderstanding your financial situation. Could you meet him at Eagle Creek Marina around 3? He thinks the 3 of us should clear the air. Louis had shown the message to Mercer immediately. The detective smiled when he read it. They're changing strategy. What do you mean? They've stopped working around you. Mercer slid the phone back across the table. Now they're trying to work through you. Margaret had only one instruction. Go. Louis looked at her. Really? Absolutely. But don't go alone. 2 unmarked vehicles parked more than 200 yards away before Louis arrived. Neither Ethan nor Clara would know they were there. Mercer had no intention of placing recording devices on Louis without proper legal authority, nor would he encourage anything that violated Indiana law. Instead, investigators would simply observe what occurred in a public place, exactly as any citizen could. At 2:57 p.m., Louis parked beside the marina. Families loaded kayaks onto pickup trucks. Children fed ducks near the shoreline. Cyclists passed along the paved trail. Everything looked peaceful. Ethan Brooks arrived 2 minutes later in his black BMW. He stepped out carrying a leather portfolio. Clara exited from the passenger side. She offered Louis a nervous smile. I'm glad you came. Louis nodded politely. So am I. Ethan extended his hand. Louis. Louis shook it. The developer's grip felt confident, perhaps too confident. Mind if we walk? Ethan asked. The 3 of them followed a paved path overlooking Eagle Creek Reservoir. For several moments, no one spoke. Finally, Ethan broke the silence. I think we've gotten off on the wrong foot. Louis glanced toward the water. Have we? I've been working with Clara on redevelopment projects. So she told me. I wanted to discuss an opportunity. Louis remained quiet. Silence encouraged people to keep talking. Ethan did exactly that. You've built an impressive financial foundation. Louis looked at him calmly. I have. Clara mentioned your grandfather invested wisely. My grandfather did. Ethan smiled. There's no reason those assets should remain underutilized. Louis noticed Clara watching Ethan instead of him. She seemed to expect the conversation to unfold naturally. Ethan continued. I have investors looking for stable partners. Louis asked a simple question. What kind of partners? People with credibility. The answer interested Louis far more than he allowed himself to show. Not money, credibility. Exactly as Margaret had predicted. Ethan stopped walking. The right financial profile opens doors. Louis looked directly at him. What profile? Government employee. Clean credit, long employment history, excellent reputation, strong family assets. Ethan spread his hands casually. People trust someone like you. Louis said nothing. The developer filled the silence again. You wouldn't need to manage anything. What would I do? Mostly sign paperwork. The sentence hung in the air. Clara shifted uneasily. Ethan kept smiling. We'd handle the business. Louis spoke evenly. What paperwork? Standard financing documents. Personal guarantees. Ethan laughed softly. Nothing unusual. Louis watched him for several seconds. Then he asked another question. Why would experienced investors need a city building inspector to sign commercial documents? For the first time, Ethan hesitated. Only briefly. You provide confidence. Louis nodded once. I see. He had no intention of arguing. Every additional explanation Ethan offered became another voluntary statement. The developer tried again. I'm talking about perfectly legitimate projects. Louis looked towards the lake. Then you shouldn't need my reputation. Ethan's smile weakened. We're simply discussing possibilities. Louis turned toward Clara. Is that why you told me you were meeting interior design clients? Clara opened her mouth, but said nothing. Ethan answered instead. We didn't want to overwhelm you. Louis almost smiled. Interesting choice of words. Not lie, not hide, only overwhelm. He looked back at Ethan. I appreciate your concern. The developer relaxed slightly. Perhaps he believed the conversation had stabilized. Then Louis asked one final question. If I decline, Ethan interrupted immediately, you'd be making a mistake. What kind? A very expensive one. The words escaped before Ethan appeared to realize how they sounded. Louis simply nodded. I'll think about it. He extended his hand again. Thank you for explaining. Ethan shook it. Take your time. I always do. Louis walked back toward his Explorer without looking behind him. He never hurried. He never checked whether investigators had seen enough. When he reached his vehicle, he drove away, exactly as though the meeting had been nothing more than an awkward business conversation. 20 minutes later, he sat once again inside Margaret Holloway's conference room. Mercer had already returned. So, Louis summarized every question, every answer, every pause, no embellishment, no assumptions, only facts. Mercer finished writing. He approached you. Yes. He suggested you sign commercial documents. Yes. He specifically referenced your financial reputation. Yes. Margaret exchanged a satisfied glance with the detective. He couldn't help himself. Noah looked up from his laptop. The cooperating witness from the bank just checked in. Everyone turned toward him. The closing meeting has been rescheduled. When? Tomorrow morning. Mercer stood immediately. Good. Why good? Louis asked. The detective smiled for the first time all day. Because the paperwork they're trying to finalize is now supported by everything we've spent weeks documenting. He closed the investigation folder carefully. I've already submitted the affidavit. Louis understood. The warrant? Mercer nodded. It was signed less than 10 minutes ago. The room fell silent. Weeks of patience, weeks of observation, weeks of resisting anger. Everything had finally reached the point where evidence, not suspicion, would determine what happened next. Outside, the afternoon sun reflected across the windows of downtown Indianapolis. Somewhere in the city, Ethan Brooks probably believed tomorrow would be the day his largest deal finally closed. He had no idea tomorrow would become the day every carefully hidden document began moving into the hands of investigators instead. Tuesday arrived with cool morning air and low clouds drifting over downtown Indianapolis. Louis Flores parked 2 blocks away from First Indiana Community Bank at 8:12 a.m., not because investigators had asked him to be there, because Detective Daniel Mercer wanted him available if his identity became necessary during the execution of the warrants. You stay in the vehicle, Mercer had instructed the night before. You are not part of the operation, Louis agreed without argument. His role had never been to catch anyone. It had been to tell the truth. At 8:41 a.m., Mercer radioed from an unmarked SUV parked on the opposite side of the block. Targets have begun arriving. Louis watched through the windshield. Sarah Whitmore entered first. She wore a charcoal business suit and carried 2 leather folders. Nothing about her appearance suggested anxiety. 7 minutes later, Ethan Brooks arrived. He spoke briefly with Sarah before both disappeared inside the executive entrance. At 8:56 a.m., Clara parked near the visitor lot. She carried the same leather portfolio Louis had seen the previous day at Eagle Creek Park. She smiled politely at the receptionist as she entered. To everyone inside the building, it looked like another routine commercial closing. Only a handful of people knew that multiple search warrants had already been signed. At exactly 900 a.m., Mercer's calm voice came over the secure channel. Operation begins. 3 unmarked vehicles rolled quietly into the parking area. No flashing lights, no sirens. Men and women in business attire stepped out carrying briefcases instead of tactical equipment. Only when they reached the entrance did they display their credentials. Federal agents, financial crimes investigators, court-authorized warrants. The lobby remained remarkably calm. Customers continued standing in line. Tellers continued assisting clients. The operation had been designed to minimize disruption. Inside Conference Room B, Ethan Brooks was reviewing the final pages of a commercial financing package when someone knocked. Sarah Whitmore looked toward the door. "Come in." Mercer entered first. 2 federal agents followed. Behind them came another investigator carrying a sealed evidence case. "Good morning." Mercer's voice remained professional. "My name is Detective Daniel Mercer." He displayed the warrant. "We're here pursuant to an order issued by the Marion County Superior Court." Silence filled the room. Ethan's confident smile disappeared. Sarah stood slowly. "There must be some misunderstanding." Mercer handed her a copy of the warrant. "You'll have plenty of opportunity to discuss that." Another investigator addressed Ethan. "Sir, we'd like you to remain seated." No handcuffs, no accusations. Not yet. Everything followed procedure. The evidence technicians immediately began photographing the room before touching anything. Every folder, every laptop, every printed document, every signature page, each item received a numbered evidence marker. Clara sat motionless. She looked from Ethan to Mercer, then back again. Her expression revealed confusion more than panic. Mercer noticed. "Mrs. Flores." She looked up. "You're not under arrest." Relief briefly crossed her face. "We do need to ask you not to leave the building until we've completed today's interviews." She's nodded silently. Across the conference table, Ethan remained unusually composed. "Am I being charged with something?" "Today we're executing search warrants." Mercer's tone never changed. "Charging decisions come later." One of the federal agents carefully examined the financing package lying open in front of Ethan. He stopped turning pages. "Detective." Mercer walked over. The agent pointed toward a signature block. "Take a look." Mercer immediately recognized the name. Louis Flores. Printed beneath it appeared a digital signature nearly identical to those Noah had recovered weeks earlier. Mercer photographed the page before placing it inside an evidence sleeve. "Interesting." Ethan leaned forward. "I've never seen that document." Mercer didn't respond. Instead, he asked the evidence technician to photograph Ethan's portfolio before opening it. Inside were 3 USB drives, a bound loan proposal, 2 company seals, and another folder labeled Supporting Financial Documentation. The contents immediately drew attention. Tax summaries, employment verification, property records, credit history. Every document belonged to Louis Flores. Mercer's jaw tightened. "Bag everything." Sarah Whitmore stepped forward. "Those files are confidential." "They certainly are." Mercer looked directly at her. "Which is why we'd like to know how they ended up here." She said nothing. Meanwhile, another team began imaging computers inside the executive offices. Hard drives were copied on site using forensic equipment. Nothing was altered. Nothing was deleted. Every action followed documented evidence procedures. Outside, Louis remained inside his Explorer. His phone stayed on the passenger seat. He resisted every temptation to ask for updates. If Mercer needed him, Mercer would call. At 10:11 a.m., the phone finally rang. "It's Mercer," Louis answered. "Everything all right?" "We found your financial file." Louis closed his eyes briefly. "My real file?" "Yes." "Employment history? Tax records? Credit reports? Insurance information? The works." Louis gripped the steering wheel. "I never gave anyone permission." "We know." Mercer paused. "And there's something else." "What?" "The supporting documentation includes your grandfather's trust." Louis's heartbeat slowed. "That's impossible." "It should be. But someone compiled a detailed summary. The trustee didn't release it." "No." Mercer sounded thoughtful. "The information isn't complete." "What do you mean?" "Whoever assembled it only had fragments." Louis understood immediately. The repeated failed inquiries. They had never gained direct access. They had collected pieces from different sources, enough to build a convincing profile, not enough to understand the trust itself. Back inside the bank, Sarah Whitmore finally requested an attorney. Mercer ended the interview immediately. No pressure, no arguments. The request was honored exactly as required. Ethan, however, chose to continue speaking. "I've invested millions into these projects." Mercer simply listened. "My companies employ hundreds of people." Again, Mercer remained silent. "I'm being treated like a criminal." The detective calmly slid a document across the table. "Can you explain why Louis Flores' personal financial records are inside your portfolio?" Ethan looked down. For nearly 10 seconds he said nothing. Finally he answered. "They were provided during due diligence." "By whom?" "Our consultants." "Names?" "I'd have to check." Mercer wrote down the response. "Nothing more." People often damaged their own credibility by offering vague explanations. There was no need to argue. The transcript would speak for itself. At noon, investigators completed the first phase of the operation. Dozens of evidence boxes were loaded into government vehicles. Forensic copies of electronic records had been secured. Original documents were cataloged. Chain of custody forms were signed. As Mercer walked toward his SUV, his phone rang. It was Noah Bennett. "I think I found the missing piece." Mercer stopped walking. "What missing piece?" "The digital signatures." "What about them? I finally know where they were created." Mercer listened quietly. Noah continued. "They weren't generated inside Ethan's office. Or the bank. They originated from another computer." "Where?" Noah took a breath. I've traced the metadata to a device registered at Louis's own house." Mercer frowned. "That's not possible." "It is. The device connected through the home's wireless network." Louis's house, his own network. Someone had used the place he considered safest to manufacture the evidence designed to destroy him. Mercer looked back toward the bank entrance. The conspiracy had just become even more personal, because whoever forged Louis Flores' identity hadn't simply stolen his name, they had worked from inside his own home. Detective Daniel Mercer drove directly from First Indiana Community Bank to Louis Flores' neighborhood. No sirens, no emergency lights, just a growing sense that the investigation had entered a completely different phase. Louis was waiting in his driveway when Mercer arrived. "What happened?" Louis asked. Mercer stepped out of the SUV carrying a tablet. "Noah found where the forged signatures originated." Louis already knew the answer from their earlier phone call. "Our house." Mercer nodded. "But that's only the beginning." Inside, Margaret Holloway and Noah Bennett had already set up temporary forensic equipment in Louis's home office. The living room looked ordinary. The kitchen still held the coffee mug Clara had used that morning. Nothing suggested the house had become part of a major financial investigation. Noah connected his laptop to a monitor. I re-examined every metadata record. A map of the home's wireless network appeared on the screen. Blue dots represented known devices. Louis's phone, his work laptop, the smart television, security cameras, printer. Everything matched the inventory Louis had provided weeks earlier. Then Noah highlighted another device. Unknown device 7F. It appeared only 8 times. Louis frowned. I've never seen that. You wouldn't. It never stayed connected for more than 20 minutes. Noah enlarged the timeline. Every connection occurred during weekday afternoons. Every connection matched periods when Louis had been working city inspections. But someone was home, Louis said quietly. Noah nodded. According to the security system. Clara. Neither man said her name immediately. Mercer finally broke the silence. The device wasn't registered to your router. It used randomized identifiers. A burner laptop? Louis asked. Possibly. Or a privacy feature. Noah displayed another graph. The important part isn't the device. It's what happened while it was connected. He highlighted several timestamps. During each connection, large encrypted files moved between the unknown device and Louis's desktop computer. But my desktop requires a password. It does. Louis stared at the screen. I never gave anyone my password. Margaret looked up from reviewing another folder. Did Clara know it? Louis thought for a moment. Years ago. I never changed it. The room fell silent. Not because anyone had reached a conclusion, because the possibility was impossible to ignore. Noah continued. I examined the desktop itself. No malware. No remote access software. No evidence of hacking. Louis understood what that implied. Someone hadn't broken into the computer. They had logged in normally, using valid credentials. Inside the house. Mercer folded his notebook closed. That significantly narrows our possibilities. Later that afternoon, investigators executed a separate search warrant at Ethan Brooks's corporate office. Unlike the bank, the office was nearly empty. Several employees had already left after hearing rumors about the morning investigation. Evidence technicians carefully photographed every room before beginning their search. One office attracted immediate attention. Clara's. It wasn't large. A desk, bookshelves, design samples, architectural drawings. Everything appeared consistent with an interior design consultant. Until investigators opened a locked filing cabinet. Inside were 3 folders: personal, financial, Flores. Mercer examined the labels. Every folder contained copies of Louis' employment evaluations, retirement projections, insurance summaries, and municipal payroll records. Many documents had handwritten notes in the margins. Strong credit, government pension, excellent audit history, low financial risk. Mercer's expression hardened. Someone had been studying Louis as though he were an investment asset. One evidence technician removed another file. It contained photographs, not family pictures, surveillance photographs, Louis leaving City Hall, Louis inspecting commercial buildings, Louis entering grocery stores, Louis visiting his mother's house. Each image included dates and times. Mercer looked carefully. How long have these been here? The technician shrugged. No way to know yet. Mercer photographed every page before sealing the folders. The investigation had crossed another line. This wasn't simply document fraud. Someone had systematically tracked Louis's daily routine. Meanwhile, Noah continued examining the home network. Late that evening, he called Mercer. I recovered deleted printer logs. Anything useful, E? Very. Most home printers quietly recorded basic information. Time, date, number of pages. No document contents, just activity. The log showed several unusually large print jobs completed while Louis had been away at work. One entry stood out immediately. 84 pages, printed 6 weeks earlier. Start time 1:16 p.m. Completion 1:24 p.m. Louis checked his calendar. I was inspecting a warehouse renovation that afternoon. So, someone else printed 84 pages from your office. Noah nodded. Using your desktop. Margaret leaned over the table. The forged loan package. Probably, Noah replied. Mercer looked thoughtful. We'll compare the paper and toner. Noah smiled. I already did. Everyone looked at him. The microscopic toner patterns match. Louis slowly exhaled. So the documents inside Ethan's portfolio were almost certainly printed in this house. No one spoke for several seconds. The evidence had become overwhelming, not emotionally, technically, scientifically, objectively. Exactly the kind of evidence juries trusted. At 7:30 p.m., Louis returned to the kitchen to make coffee. The house felt strangely unfamiliar. Every hallway now carried hidden meaning. Every room held memories mixed with questions. He looked toward the dining room where he and Clara had celebrated anniversaries, toward the living room where they had watched football games every autumn, toward the home office where he had paid bills, planned vacations, and organized family photographs. Somewhere inside those ordinary routines, someone had quietly transformed his own home into the production site for forged financial documents. Margaret joined him. You all right? Louis nodded slowly. I keep thinking about something. What? If I hadn't heard her whisper that night? He never finished the sentence. Margaret understood. The conspiracy might have continued for months, perhaps years. Eventually, failed projects, unpaid loans, and fraudulent guarantees could have pointed directly toward Louis, his reputation, his career, his freedom. Instead, one whispered sentence had started a chain of careful decisions. No accusations, no shouting, no revenge. Only evidence. Mercer's phone rang. He answered immediately. Mercer. He listened for nearly a minute. When he ended the call, everyone looked at him. That was the forensic accounting team. What did they find? Louis asked. Mercer placed another document on the table. They traced the first transfer. Louis looked down. The money had not gone where anyone expected. Instead of moving directly into one of Ethan Brooks's companies, the funds had passed through 3 separate shell corporations before arriving in a charitable foundation. Margaret frowned. A charity? Mercer nodded. On paper. He pointed to the incorporation documents. The foundation exists. The donations do not. Louis studied the name. Harbor Future Community Foundation. It sounded respectable. Almost admirable. Then he noticed something else. The foundation's mailing address. His heart skipped. It was the same downtown office suite that housed Midwest Capital Advisory Group, the organization that had appeared at the very beginning of the investigation. The circle was closing, and for the first time investigators could see not only how the money moved, but where it had ultimately been hidden. The Harbor Future Community Foundation occupied a quiet office suite on the 12th floor of a downtown Indianapolis office building. Its website described scholarships, community revitalization, youth mentorship, annual fundraising dinners. Everything appeared legitimate. Its public tax filings showed charitable donations, grants, and administrative expenses. Nothing immediately suggested fraud. That was precisely what concerned Detective Daniel Mercer. The best financial laundering operations don't look illegal, he told the team during Wednesday's briefing. They look respectable. Margaret Holloway spread several tax filings across the conference table. I've compared the foundation's public disclosures with the shell companies. She pointed to a highlighted section. The numbers don't match. Louis leaned closer. How? The foundation reports receiving charitable donations. She turned another page. but the companies reporting those same donations classify them as consulting expenses. Noah Bennett nodded. The money changes identities. Mercer summarized the pattern. Business expense. He tapped one document. Corporate consulting fee. Another. Charitable donation. Another. Development grant. The same dollars appeared under different descriptions depending on who filed the paperwork. Margaret looked toward Louis. That's rarely an accounting mistake. It usually indicates deliberate concealment. Louis studied the documents. So every transaction becomes harder to follow. Exactly. Noah projected a flowchart onto the monitor. Blue arrows represented legitimate business transactions. Red arrows traced the suspicious transfers. Money left Ethan Brooks's companies, passed through consulting firms, entered Harbor Future Community Foundation, then quietly returned to newly formed development LLCs as community investment grants. The money had traveled in a circle, only its labels changed. Mercer folded his arms. They weren't just moving money. They were cleaning it. Thursday morning, federal forensic accountants completed another review. Their findings surprised everyone, not because of what they discovered, because of what they didn't. No money had ever entered Louis Flores' personal accounts. Not once. Margaret smiled. I was hoping we'd see that. Louis looked up. Why? Because it destroys one possible defense. What defense? She answered immediately. That you secretly benefited. The accounting records showed something entirely different. Louis's identity had been used repeatedly. His finances had been referenced. His reputation had supported loan applications, but not a single dollar had ever been deposited into his accounts. He had gained nothing. He had only accumulated risk. Mercer nodded. That's powerful evidence. Late that afternoon, investigators received another subpoena response from First Indiana Community Bank. This one included internal email archives, thousands of messages, most routine loan discussions, meeting schedules, holiday notices, compliance reminders. Noah began filtering them using keywords connected to Ethan Brooks's companies. Within an hour, he located something unusual. An email chain between Sarah Whitmore and another executive. Subject: additional verification required. The body contained only one sentence. Need stronger financial profile before committee review. Below it, Sarah had replied. Already working on it. No names, no direct references. Standing alone, the message proved very little. Placed beside everything else, it became another piece of the pattern. Mercer wrote the email's reference number into his notebook. We'll ask about this later. That evening, Louis returned home to find Clara sitting alone on the back patio. She looked tired. For the first time in weeks, her confidence seemed diminished. Long day, Louis asked. She nodded. Everything feels complicated. He took a seat across from her. The evening air carried the scent of freshly cut grass from neighboring yards. Neither of them spoke for nearly a minute. Finally, Clara broke the silence. Do you ever wonder if people make one bad decision? She stopped. Louis looked at her quietly. And then spend months trying to convince themselves it wasn't really that bad? He answered honestly. I think people usually make many small decisions. She looked at him. The first one is the easiest. The next ones become easier. She stared into her coffee cup. I suppose that's true. Louis wanted to ask 100 questions. Instead, he asked none. If Clara wished to speak, she would. If not, investigators already possessed far more reliable evidence than any emotional confession made across a patio table. She finally stood. I'm going to bed early. Sleep well. You too. As she disappeared inside the house, Louis remained outside. Mercer had been right. People under pressure changed, sometimes dramatically. Friday morning brought another development. A federal forensic examiner completed analysis of the USB drives recovered from Ethan Brooks's portfolio. Most files contained ordinary project documents, construction budgets, architectural renderings, engineering reports. Then investigators opened a password-protected folder. Inside sat dozens of scanned identity documents, driver's licenses, employment records, tax summaries, financial statements, not only Louis's. There were files belonging to 7 other individuals: business owners, retired executives, a physician, a commercial property investor. Every person possessed one characteristic in common: excellent financial reputations. Margaret stared at the screen. So, Louis wasn't the only target? Mercer nodded slowly. No. He was simply the most valuable. The realization changed the scale of the investigation. This was no longer a conspiracy centered solely on Louis Flores. Investigators now suspected a broader scheme built around borrowing the credibility of financially stable individuals without their knowledge. Some identities had apparently been used successfully. Others perhaps never progressed beyond planning. Noah opened another spreadsheet. Columns filled the screen. Target, credit rating, estimated assets, professional licenses, community standing. Louis's name appeared near the top. Beside it sat a handwritten note scanned into the file. Highest trust factor. Mercer looked at Louis. I've investigated organized fraud for nearly 20 years. He paused. I've never seen victims ranked by reputation before. That afternoon, another call came from the trustee managing the Flores Family Trust. This time, the news was encouraging. We completed a full internal audit. And, Margaret asked over speakerphone, no unauthorized access. No missing assets. No irregular distributions. Louis closed his eyes briefly. For the first time since the investigation began, one major concern had been eliminated. His grandfather's trust remained exactly as intended, protected, untouched. The old safeguards had worked. Before ending the call, the trustee added one final observation. Whoever was trying to understand the trust misunderstood its structure. Margaret smiled. They assumed Louis controlled the assets. They assumed wrong. Saturday morning, Noah requested one final forensic review of the desktop computer from Louis's home. He wasn't looking for deleted files anymore. He was looking for physical usage patterns, keyboard activity, mouse movement, login duration, screen wake events. By evening, the report arrived. The unknown user hadn't simply logged into the computer. They had worked comfortably. Long sessions, confident navigation, no hesitation, no failed passwords, no searching for folders. Whoever used the computer knew exactly where everything was. They behaved less like an intruder and more like someone who believed they belonged in the house. Mercer quietly closed the report. We're getting close. Louis nodded. He could feel it too. Not because of instinct, because every new document answered questions that had remained unresolved for weeks. The evidence was no longer expanding outward. It was tightening inward, toward specific people, specific decisions, specific dates. Soon the investigation would no longer focus on how the fraud had happened. It would focus on who would ultimately answer for it in court. 3 weeks after the search warrants were executed, the conference room inside Margaret Holloway's law office looked more like a trial preparation center than a legal office. Evidence boxes lined one wall. Large timelines stretched across whiteboards. Every document carried an exhibit number. Every digital file had been cataloged. Every witness interview had been transcribed. Detective Daniel Mercer stood beside the largest board. I think we've reached the point where we stop asking what happened. He looked around the room. And start proving it. Louis Flores sat quietly near the end of the table. For weeks he had watched investigators assemble thousands of individual facts. Now those facts were beginning to form a complete story. Noah Bennett projected a master timeline onto the screen. The first event appeared almost 11 months earlier. Formation of Brooks Strategic Development, LLC. 3 weeks later came another. Clara hired as an independent design consultant. Another month passed. New shell companies, commercial loan applications, private meetings, unauthorized collection of Louis's financial records, attempts to access the Flores family trust, forged signatures, fraudulent guarantees. Each event alone seemed explainable. Together, they revealed a coordinated plan. Margaret picked up a yellow marker. I want to test something. She circled one date. When did Clara first begin working with Ethan? Noah answered immediately. 11 months ago. Margaret circled another. When was the first forged signature created? About 7 weeks later. She nodded. So whoever planned this didn't begin with forgery. Louis looked up. They started by gathering information. Exactly. She continued drawing arrows across the timeline. First, they studied you. Then another arrow. They collected documents. Another. They learned your schedule. Another. They built companies. Another. Only then did they begin creating fraudulent paperwork? Mercer folded his arms. That sequence matters. Louis understood why. Fraud required intent. Intent became much easier to demonstrate when preparation stretched across months. A spontaneous mistake looked very different from a carefully organized plan. Later that morning, federal prosecutors joined the meeting. Assistant United States Attorney Karen Mitchell introduced herself with a brief handshake. She had spent 2 decades prosecuting complex financial crimes. Her reputation inside Indiana's federal courthouse was formidable. I've reviewed the preliminary file. She looked toward Louis. You've shown remarkable restraint. Louis answered honestly. I had good advice. She smiled toward Margaret. Clearly. Mitchell opened a thick binder. I don't build cases around assumptions. No one here does, Mercer replied. I build them around evidence that survives cross-examination. For nearly 4 hours, she challenged every important conclusion. Could another person have accessed Louis's computer? Yes. Could the forged signatures theoretically have been created elsewhere? Initially, yes. Could Ethan claim ignorance? Possibly. Could Sarah Whitmore argue she relied on inaccurate information supplied by others? Certainly. Every possible defense received careful discussion. No one dismissed difficult questions. Instead, they searched for evidence capable of answering them. Finally, Mitchell closed the binder. This is stronger than I expected. Noah looked relieved. Margaret remained cautious. What still worries you? The human factor. Louis listened carefully. Mitchell continued. Financial records are objective. Metadata is objective. Forensic analysis is objective. She paused. But juries also evaluate credibility. She turned toward Louis. You'll probably testify. I understand. The defense will try to portray you as an angry husband seeking revenge. Louis nodded slowly. I've thought about that. What will you say? Louis didn't answer immediately. Instead, he remembered the night everything had changed. The whisper, the temptation to confront Clara immediately, the decision to remain silent. Finally, he spoke. I'll tell the truth. Mitchell smiled. That's exactly the answer I hoped for. That afternoon, Mercer received another report from forensic accountants. This one reconstructed every suspicious financial movement connected to Ethan Brooks's companies. The chart covered nearly 2 years. Money flowed through consulting firms, marketing companies, property management businesses, charitable foundations, real estate partnerships. By the end of the analysis, investigators had identified more than 20 separate business entities connected through overlapping ownership, shared addresses, or common financial activity. Only 4 had any legitimate employees. The remaining companies existed largely on paper. Margaret examined the ownership diagrams. They built a maze. Mercer nodded. But every maze has an entrance. And an exit. Noah highlighted one recurring address. Suite 1204. The same downtown office where Midwest Capital Advisory Group operated. The same address used by Harbor Future Community Foundation. The same address listed by 6 shell companies. The same address appearing in dozens of commercial filings. Everything returned there. Louis stared at the diagram. It all started there. And it probably ends there, Mercer replied. The following morning, another witness agreed to cooperate. A former administrative assistant who had worked briefly for Ethan Brooks contacted investigators through her attorney. She requested immunity for minor record-keeping violations in exchange for truthful testimony. Mercer interviewed her that afternoon. She described an office culture built around secrecy. Employees were discouraged from asking questions. Certain files remained locked. Specific meetings required everyone else to leave the office. Most importantly, she remembered one recurring instruction. Whenever Mr. Brooks met with Ms. Whitmore, prepare the Flores file. Mercer asked her to clarify. Which Flores file? The blue one. What was inside? I don't know. I wasn't allowed to open it. Who handled it? Usually Mr. Brooks. Sometimes Ms. Flores. The answer was carefully recorded. Not because it proved guilt, because it established routine, repeated behavior, consistent preparation. Exactly the kind of testimony juries often found persuasive when supported by documents. That evening, Louis visited his mother again. Olivia prepared dinner while listening to the latest developments. When he finished speaking, she placed another photograph on the table. It showed Louis and his grandfather standing beside an old fishing boat, nearly 30 years earlier. Miguel Flores had one hand resting on his grandson's shoulder. You know what he told you that day? Olivia asked. Louis smiled faintly. I was 8. I don't remember. She did. He said something very simple. She looked at the photograph. If someone lies about you, don't race to outrun the lie. Louis waited. Stand still. Eventually, the truth catches it. For several moments, neither of them spoke. The photograph suddenly felt less like a childhood memory and more like a summary of the entire investigation. Back downtown, Mercer finished reading the administrative assistant's interview transcript. Before leaving his office for the night, he received one final email from the U.S. Attorney's Office. Approved. Formal criminal charges would be presented to the federal grand jury the following morning. The investigation was no longer merely gathering evidence. It was crossing the threshold into prosecution. And for the first time since Louis heard a whisper in the darkness, justice was no longer a distant possibility. It had begun moving through the legal system exactly as his grandfather had always believed it should, patiently, methodically, one verified fact at a time. 6 months later, autumn settled gently over Indianapolis. The maple trees surrounding the Marion County Courthouse had turned deep shades of red and gold. Reporters waited outside the entrance cameras positioned along the sidewalk. Lawyers hurried through security carrying heavy case files. Inside courtroom 4B, the final stage of the investigation was about to begin. Louis Flores sat beside Margaret Holloway. Neither of them spoke much. There was nothing left to prepare. The evidence had already been collected. The witnesses had already been interviewed. Now everything depended upon the facts presented in open court. Across the aisle sat Ethan Brooks with his defense attorneys. He looked very different from the confident developer Louis had met at Eagle Creek Park. The expensive confidence had disappeared. So had the easy smile. Several rows behind him sat Sarah Whitmore. She avoided looking towards the prosecution table. Clara entered quietly with her attorney. She looked older than Louis remembered. Not physically, emotionally. Weeks of uncertainty had left visible marks that expensive clothing could not hide. Judge Rebecca Collins entered precisely at 9 o'clock. Good morning. Everyone stood. The courtroom settled into complete silence. The prosecution spent 4 days presenting its case. Detective Daniel Mercer testified first, methodically, carefully. He walked the jury through every stage of the investigation. The midnight whisper, the photographs, the preserved documents, the search warrants, the recovered financial records. Each exhibit followed the last in chronological order. No dramatic speeches, no exaggeration, only facts. Next came Noah Bennett. The defense challenged nearly every technical conclusion. Noah answered every question with the same calm precision that had characterized the investigation from the beginning. When asked whether digital metadata could be manipulated, he answered honestly. In limited circumstances, yes. The defense attorney smiled. So it can be altered. It can. A brief pause. But not in the manner reflected by these records. He explained why. Server logs, printer histories, network timestamps, independent backups. Each system confirmed the others. Changing one would not change them all. The defense had no further questions. Margaret called Louis as one of the final witnesses. He walked to the witness stand, placed his hand on the Bible, took the oath. The prosecutor began simply. Please tell the jury your occupation. I'm a senior commercial building inspector for the city of Indianapolis. How long have you served in that position? Nearly 14 years. Questions continued. His military background, his marriage, the night he heard Clara whisper, his decision not to confront anyone. The jury listened carefully. Then came the question everyone expected. Mr. Flores, why didn't you simply accuse your wife immediately? Louis looked towards the jurors. Because accusations aren't evidence. The courtroom remained silent. I knew that if something illegal was happening, he paused. The truth would be easier to prove than to argue. Several jurors wrote notes. The prosecutor nodded. No further questions. Cross-examination began. The defense attorney approached slowly. Mr. Flores. Yes. You were hurt by your wife's actions. Yes. You suspected she was lying? Yes. You followed her? Yes. So you were emotionally involved? I was. The attorney smiled. And angry. Louis answered without hesitation. I was disappointed. Not angry. I became angry later. When I discovered someone had used my identity. The attorney changed direction. You wanted Ethan Brooks arrested. I wanted the investigation completed. You wanted revenge. Louis met his eyes calmly. No. What did you want? The truth. The courtroom grew quiet again. The defense attorney looked at his notes, then back at Louis. No further questions. The most unexpected testimony came from Clara. She had negotiated a cooperation agreement after accepting responsibility for her own actions. She was not excused from consequences. But she agreed to testify truthfully. The courtroom watched as she entered the witness stand. She spoke softly. At first. Then with increasing clarity. She admitted that Ethan Brooks had convinced her the financial arrangements were temporary. He repeatedly assured her that Louis would never be personally harmed. Whenever she questioned the legality of certain documents, Ethan insisted lawyers had approved everything. At first, she believed him. Later, she suspected otherwise. Yet she continued. One decision became another, then another, until she no longer knew how to stop. The prosecutor asked quietly, "Why didn't you tell your husband?" Clara lowered her head. Because every week it became harder. She wiped away a tear. I thought if I fixed it before he found out. Her voice broke. He'd never know. The prosecutor waited. But he did. Yes. And by then, I had already betrayed him. There were no excuses left, only admissions. After 3 weeks of testimony, the case went to the jury. The wait lasted 2 days. On the afternoon of the second day, the courtroom filled once more. Judge Collins entered. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" The foreperson stood. "We have." One by one, the verdicts were read. Guilty. Conspiracy to commit wire fraud. Guilty. Bank fraud. Guilty. Aggravated identity theft. Guilty. Forgery. Guilty. Multiple related financial offenses. Ethan Brooks closed his eyes. Sarah Whitmore remained motionless as guilty verdicts followed on the principal counts against her. The courtroom remained completely silent. No celebration, no applause. Justice did not require either. It required only a lawful verdict supported by evidence. Several weeks later, sentencing concluded. Ethan Brooks received a lengthy federal prison sentence. Sarah Whitmore also received a substantial sentence along with permanent restrictions, preventing her from working in federally insured financial institutions. The court ordered millions of dollars in forfeitures and restitution proceedings. Separate civil actions dissolved the shell companies. Harbor Future Community Foundation was placed into receivership before ultimately being dissolved. Every fraudulent filing connected to Louis Flores was formally vacated. His name was cleared through official court orders. Copies of those orders were delivered to government agencies, financial institutions, and public records offices, exactly as Margaret had promised. The truth did not merely defeat the lie, it replaced it in the official record. Winter arrived. Louis stood once again beside Eagle Creek Reservoir. The same place where Ethan Brooks had once asked him to mostly sign paperwork. The lake was quiet. A light wind moved across the water. His phone rang. It was Detective Mercer. "Thought you'd like to know?" "What?" "The city just announced your promotion." Louis smiled. "I hadn't heard." "You've been appointed Director of Commercial Compliance." Louis laughed softly. "I suppose someone finally read my personnel file." "They certainly did." Mercer paused. "You earned it." After the call ended, Louis remained beside the water for several more minutes. He wasn't thinking about the trial, or the verdict, or the headlines. He was thinking about his grandfather. Money can be stolen, property can be forged, signatures can be copied, character cannot. Only now did Louis fully understand those words. His reputation had not survived because he fought harder than everyone else. It survived because when everything around him encouraged anger, panic, and revenge, he chose patience, he chose evidence, he chose the law. Months later, Louis visited his grandfather's grave carrying a small bouquet of white lilies. He placed them gently against the headstone. "I finally understand." The winter air remained still. No answer came. None was needed. As he walked back toward his vehicle, he realized the whisper that had shattered his world had also saved it. Had he ignored those 4 words, "He knows nothing," he might have signed away his future without ever holding the pen. Instead, he listened, he observed, he waited. And because he trusted the truth more than his anger, justice arrived exactly the way it should. Quietly, patiently. One verified fact at a time. Every great betrayal begins with a small compromise, and every great act of justice begins with a single choice. Louis didn't save his life because he was stronger, wealthier, or smarter than everyone else. He saved it because he refused to let anger make his decisions. Instead of chasing revenge, he chose patience. Instead of making accusations, he gathered facts. Instead of allowing fear to control him, he trusted that the truth, when carefully preserved, would eventually speak louder than any lie. This story reminds us that character is the one thing no one can steal, unless we willingly give it away. Money can be lost, reputations can be attacked, and trust can be broken, but integrity has an extraordinary power to endure. Life will sometimes place us in situations where we feel betrayed by the people we love most. In those moments, our greatest victory is not proving someone else wrong. It is refusing to become someone we are not. Justice may not arrive overnight, but when it is built on truth, patience, and courage, it has a way of lasting far longer than deception ever can. If this story touched your heart or made you reflect on your own life, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever faced a situation where staying calm and trusting the truth made all the difference? Share your experience in the comments below. Your story might encourage someone who needs it today. And if you enjoy meaningful stories about resilience, justice, and the strength of good character, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you won't miss our next installment.